Okay, recording started. Welcome to the October 2nd study hall, where we are going to continue discussion of personalizing the passages. We just talked about the rules, so here's the copyright notice for these problems. They are all copyright GMAC. They're from the free GMAT prep software. And with that, let's go ahead and find one. Okay, you'll see a problem pretty soon. There you go. And again, the theme here is this. It's personalizing the passages. And what we mean by that, the discussion we've had in previous classes, whenever a passage has to do with the actions of people or businesses, it's like the old saying, that medical school is easy if you're the patient, which is very true, right? So you can always get better insights by just taking on the perspective of whoever is most central here. So just take a moment to think about who is the key decision maker, or whose actions or whose priorities determine how the situation is going to turn out. So one way that you might want to do these, again, you can try on different ways of reading these passages. But one way that you might think about going through these things, if you see a passage that involves people, like first you can quickly browse it, notice what the goal is. Because you don't want to spend too much time reading the original passage without a goal. I mean, if you don't really know what you're trying to do with it, then it doesn't make a lot of sense to spend a ton of time reading it. So then figure out whose point of view is most important to the resolution of the problem. I mean, a couple of these are pretty, there's some patterns here. Like if you got a passage about whether a product will sell, for instance, then you're going to have to think about buyers, like what would motivate the buyer to purchase the product, that sort of thing. So, but just think about whose actions ultimately make this thing go or not go. Then when you've done that, just adopt that point of view. Take it, go back, read the passage from that point of view. Give it a shot. So here's the problem that we had. And don't forget where your multiple choice answers are found. Multiple choice answers are here. Okay, so don't forget where those are. Give this a shot. Okay, we should probably be finishing this up fairly soon. Although fewer than half of you guys have picked things yet. So time to pick some things. Okay, so I can't really force you to pick an answer, and we do have to move on at a certain point. But remember how this test works. You can't not pick a choice. There's no such thing as that. So if you are one of the, actually several people who still have this blank, yeah, you got to pick something. Okay, so remember, this is ultimately about decisions made by somebody. If you want to think about, you don't have to read this thing straight through from top to bottom. Instead, you always want to check the question out first. So here's the question part. step one, read this. Okay, there's some plan, and we want to know what's going to make it fail. And what's the plan? Like, what is success for this plan defined as? Yeah, I mean, the plan is the ultimate goal of the plan is to make purchasing electric vehicles more attractive. So success, by definition, is going to mean that more people are buying electric cars. So what does it mean now that this would happen? Threatens the plan's prospects for success, means in concrete terms, we had to explain it to a 9-year-old. What would this mean concretely to threaten the plan's prospects for success? Concretely though, I mean, less attractive, getting there, but you can be more concrete than that. Yeah, it's not very concrete though. Assumption is wrong. That's up there. That's kind of up there in the clouds. Yeah, there you go. Assuming you mean cars and not cards. Yeah, Tiffany, right? Threatening the plan's prospect. The prospect of success means that people are going to buy these cars. So profits are not mentioned. Actually, profits are not mentioned at all anyway. So this means that threatening the plan's prospects for success means it's going to make people not buy the cars. That's what it means. So whose decisions ultimately lie at the center of this issue? Yeah, so you should read this as the potential customer, as the person who may or may not be in the market for an electric car. Because, definitely that's the decision that matters here, is whether someone buys this car or not. So you should read from that point of view. Okay, read from the point of view of the customer. Okay, so we do this, and in particular, it's not just any customer. It's customers who want to do what? If you look at the plan part that's already highlighted, in an attempt to make purchasing electric vehicles more attractive to commuters. So that's who you are here. The plan is meant to appeal to commuters. So success means that more commuters are buying these cars, and lack of success means that they're not. So from the point of view of the customer, this means you are a commuter who is considering buying one of these things. Okay, but the commuter part is important because anything that's going to appeal to non-commuters is basically irrelevant to you. And as what they're saying here is that you are very likely to also want to use your electric vehicle for occasional longer trips. Okay, and so what they're going to do is they're going to offer you 3 days of free car rental for every 1,000 miles that you drive. All right, now you want this to work against this plan. So the key part of this thing is decoding the answer choices, because this sounds good, right? I mean, this plan sounds like a nice plan when you first read it. Sounds like a decent idea. So let's take a look at the answer choices and see what kind of effect they have. What what effect does A have on you as a person who commutes to work in your car? No effect at all, right? I mean, electric vehicles used for commercial purposes, that's not you, so you don't care. And again, it's a lot easier to tell when things are relevant or irrelevant if you have a personal stake in the passage, because you can just be like, nope, I don't care. I mean, if you personalize this point of view, it is extremely obvious what matters and what does not matter. Okay. What does B mean for you? This price is already high. And if they do this, it's going to drive up the price even more. You have candy, but you have to pay for a chicken. That's one way of saying it, right? So, because, yeah, right, if the price is already high and it's going to get even higher, then that's definitely going to put people off of wanting to buy the car. So this is a choice that we want. As far as this comment that's in the chat box here, someone mentions, okay, the passage doesn't talk about prices, and this is true, but this is exactly the point. I mean, if you've done much critical reasoning, then you'll realize this is pretty much always how it works, at least on any questions involving strengthening, weakening, or evaluating arguments. The point is that you have to bring in outside information, right? So this is pretty much par for the course. Right? This is how just about all of this genre of problems work. Strengthen, weaken, evaluate problems. I mean, they pretty much all work like this. Because I mean, you think about strengthening or weakening arguments in real life, I mean, you do have to bring in outside information to do that. I mean, if you had a court case, for instance, if you need to make it a stronger case, that means you have to bring in more evidence. You can't just keep pointing to the evidence that's already there. You have to actually bring in more stuff. And in general, these questions are pretty much always going to require you to bring in more stuff. More stuff. So that's not a problem. In fact, this is generally a desirable quality of answer choices. What does C mean for you? I mean, you're a commuter. There's a lot of words in this choice. What does this mean to a 10-year-old? Choice C. Someone simplified this for me. Yeah, it just means that recharging, I like the way Wilton puts it there, right? Recharging the battery is not the issue. I wouldn't say don't need the rental, because the inability to use electric vehicles for extended trips, inability means inability. I mean, you might be able to charge your battery easily enough on commutes, but an inability is still an inability. So the rental would still have value. But basically C says that the battery charge time, which could potentially have been an issue, is actually not an issue. So this is definitely not going to be a bad thing for buying this car, right? Because basically what we're saying here is that something that could have been an issue, a potential issue, becomes a non-issue here. So that's actually going to work in favor. It strikes down one of the cons of buying this car. So it may not really add to the pluses, but at least it takes away a minus, which is overall, in terms of the effect, is kind of equivalent, yeah. What about D? Although electric vehicles are essentially emission-free in actual use, generating the electricity can burden the environment. Well, not really much of a clear connection to anything here. I mean, you would have to make a million zillion very tenuous assumptions about the way that our buyer thinks and prioritizes things in the world. You would have to make lots and lots and lots of assumptions out of nowhere, because power plants burdening the environment, there's no obvious connection to buying car or not buying car here. Because I mean, even if this were any issue, it's still an electric car, and it probably pollutes the environment a lot less than gas cars do. So, exactly, it's what I'll just put it in the chat box. Absolutely. And then E, some of these things are used primarily not for commuting. This is sort of like choice A. I just don't care because I am a commuter. And as a commuter, I honestly don't care about non-commuters. It's not really my problem. Any questions about this problem? I mean, notice once you adopt the point of view of the potential buyer of the car, your life is a lot easier. A lot easier. Any questions about this problem, feel free to type them in the chat. If not, I will put another problem on the board. Let's see. Recharging patterns. Okay. Well. What, Arvind, I don't really see what you are saying about D. Maybe you can ask a question that is a question and like ends with a question mark and is more specific. So our price and cost now. Figueroa, give me some context for your question. I mean, which words price and cost are you asking about here? Let's see. Cost. I mean, price generally is the price that a consumer pays on the market, whereas cost is the production cost. That's how those words are traditionally used. But if you're looking at these words here in this choice, then I mean it's pretty clear what they mean in context. I mean, this says the cost to the producer. And then that cost would add to the price. So this price is definitely not the producer's cost. Otherwise, you would have this redundant sentence. So this must be the consumer price, and this must be the producer's cost. It's pretty. You can figure it out from context. Let's see. Okay. So Xenophon, if you were the producer or the seller of the car, if you think about it, if you actually sold these things, then the very first thing you would do would probably be, let me think from the point of view of the buyer. It's probably what you would do, right? If you were thinking about putting this promotion on, you would try to get inside the head of the buyer and say what would make the buyer want to or not want to purchase this. Like at the end of the day, you're still going to wind up as the buyer through some path or another. Because ultimately it's going to come down to that. So, even if you go that route, even if you make yourself the seller, you'll still ultimately end up in the same place. Because you'll realize that the decision maker here is the buyer. Okay. Badri, no, that just makes choice E irrelevant because they're trying to sell these cars to people who do commute. This just says that some cars are used for not commuting. Okay, well that makes those cars irrelevant to me, but that doesn't mean they can't still sell some cars to me. It's not thing. Okay, other things, I think we addressed the questions. Let's do another one. There you go. And multiple choice answers might cover up part of the question for a second. Okay, go ahead and give this a shot. Okay, we should probably be finishing this up pretty soon. And I'm not sure exactly what that comment means. Prefer a younger one, but perhaps you can explain. If you are still working on this thing, then is this problem old? Okay. I mean, I don't really know how old the problems are. They're in the prep software. So, anyways, if you're still working on this, you're probably kind of going around in circles by this point. Remember to be honest with yourself. Am I getting anywhere, yes or no? You know, am I making progress? The most compact way I've found to express the idea is just ask yourself, am I looking for things right now, or am I looking at things? This is what you can ask yourself with all of verbal problems, because if you are just looking at words, then it's time to quit and guess. So you can take that as a general idea for all these verbal problems. If you are looking for things, then that's good. Keep going. But if you're just looking at things, then you're done. And you should stop what you're doing and guess, or try to take another avenue of thought here. But you're done. Just make sure you have goals, right? You should never just be looking at words or reading them aimlessly. Okay, let's talk about this. There are still a number of you who haven't answered the question. Figueroa, Kevin, Lauren, Olivia, Radust. So a couple of you guys are delayed a little bit on the internet, but make sure you pick a choice here. Okay, again, what you want to do is figure out whose perspective matters here, and in order to do that, you might want to read things out of order. So evaluate the argument. That doesn't really help us figure out a point of view, because it's not very specific. So in order to figure out a point of view, we got to dip into the actual stuff that's here. So the point, I mean, they don't generally hide the conclusions of things that you have to weaken or evaluate or strengthen. Like in those problems, the main point is almost invariably at the end. And same thing is true here. This is ultimately where they're headed with this. So the issue is whether inappropriate prescriptions will be written more often. I mean, whose action is that? Yeah, it's the doctor. Because if you think about it, who makes this happen or not happen, it's not the patient. At least not directly. I mean, ultimately, the decision maker here is the physician, the doctor. So you should read these things from the point of view of the physician. Yeah, last frontier, so to speak, sure, right? So you're the doctor, so now you look at this. This means they're only allowed to advertise prescription drugs directly to you. Like your patients don't see ads for prescription drugs. In the same way that in the United States it's illegal to have TV commercials for cigarettes or liquor. That's why they're always on billboards and stuff, right? They're just restrictions. So they can only advertise to you right now. But now they're thinking about allowing advertising to consumers, random patients. So, but then some people say, well, basically random patients are stupid and they might ask you for medicines that are totally bad for them. But you can say, you can nix that. You can be like, nope, bad, don't do it. And you can not give them prescriptions. So then they're saying that they would not become more common. That's a pretty ambitious statement. And that's basically saying that you are not ever going to write prescriptions that you wouldn't have written because these ads are out there. But yeah, it's like, if you think about it, the only way this could fail would be if you wrote more prescriptions because of the advertising, which would mean the only way that could reasonably happen is if a patient saw it, came into your office and was like, hey doc, I saw this drug commercial and I really want this drug. Yeah, you just got to think about it, right? Now that's the only reasonable way that this could not be true. Because there's no other influences exerting any sort of force on your decision making here. So, you can, as you read, you can figure this out. Not always, but a lot of the time when you read these things, you can figure out how you could weaken it or how you could go after it just by looking through it. So, as you read this one, you should figure out that the only way in which this argument could fail is if patients see the ads, come in, ask for the drug, and then you give it to them when you would not have given it otherwise. So you capitulate to what they're asking you. You're like, okay, sure, why not? Have it. Okay, this. There's a lot of big words here. But this is basically whether the ads will actually let patients know about drugs that will work for their diseases, and they didn't know about them before. Someone tell me about this choice. Yeah, why is it unrelated? Like, what is it? I mean, because it does. I mean, if they're going to have to give it, they're going to have to come to you for these prescriptions as well. But yeah, that's the right, because remember, don't forget the goal, right? Don't forget the focus. The focus is on prescriptions that are bad for the patient. So this is not that at all. This is talking about prescriptions that absolutely make sense, and so we don't care. I mean, we care about the ones that are bad, that the patient shouldn't get. So, yeah, in other words, these would be appropriate prescriptions. So if there's more of those, then that doesn't affect this. We're only worried about the number of prescriptions that are not appropriate. It doesn't have any effect. Okay. B, whether some people might go to a doctor for no reason other than to ask for this. Like, as opposed to asking at your regular checkup. Tell me about this. Does this affect? Yeah, this doesn't affect what you do. I mean, even if they do that, the decision is still in your hands. And there's no reason to think that this would affect your decision. So, I mean, if they're in your office, they're in your office. So, this doesn't affect your decision-making process. Good. Yeah, I don't know what doctor does as a result. Whether they provide the same information, I mean, that's not really the point, right? I mean, the information they give doctors could be more technical. It also might not be more technical. But the point is just the mere existence of the ads, not what's in them. You know, because right now there are no ads at all, so patients are just not aware of a lot of these drugs. So even if they are differential information, it doesn't matter as long as the ads are out there. Are they a current source of information about newly available medicines? This is another change of focus, right? You've got, because newly available is not the point. The point is just inappropriate prescriptions. I mean, it could be inappropriate prescriptions for drugs that have been around for a long time. you know, like when you think about advertised medicines, I mean, you probably think about Viagra and stuff like that. I mean, those are not new things. They've been around for 20 plus years, but people might still come in and ask for them when they don't need it. So it doesn't matter whether it's newly available or not. Inappropriate is inappropriate, even if it's an old drug. And then if you get all the way down to E, then you realize that E is a home run. I mean, it's exactly what we were thinking when we read this. Like, the way it can fail is if you give in to what your patients are asking you to do. And that's exactly, actually verbatim, what this says. Whether patients would give in to a patient's demand for a prescription medication. So they came in chosen by the patient, you didn't choose it. So if they do, then a lot of these are going to be inappropriate. So this is your winner. Any questions about this? See, a couple people are typing. I'll wait and see what you guys type. Would the customer's choice of prescription be appropriate if it does? Well, not always, right? I mean, it's going to be appropriate some of the time and not some of the time. But if you're giving in, then I mean, common sense dictates that in at least some cases, that's going to be an inappropriate prescription. Yeah, it's not going to be appropriate 100% of the time. Sometimes it'll be appropriate, maybe, if you had an unusually educated patient. But some of the time it's not. Some of the time it's going to be like, oh, your first aid didn't work, now give me what I want. I mean, no, some of the time it's going to be, right? Some of the time it won't be so appropriate. But yeah. Olivia's typing. Let's see what Olivia has to say. Does the word evaluate? So evaluate basically means the same thing as strengthen or weaken, except you just aren't taking sides. Like, notice that each of these choices starts with whether. In other evaluate problems, they ask questions instead of statements. But the point is, if these were definite statements instead of things starting with whether, then they would either strengthen or weaken. I mean, the right answer would either strengthen or weaken the argument. So if this was, instead of whether, if this is physicians would actually do this, then it would weaken this claim. It would substantially weaken it. Whereas if you make these definite statements, they have no effect, right? If advertising does alert patients to the existence of appropriate meds, then this is not effective. If people do go to doctors just to ask about advertised drugs, doesn't matter, because it's still in your hands. If the information is different or if it's the same, no effect, as long as the information exists, etc. So like evaluate is just judge. So that could include it's strong, it's weak. But it's basically just non-committal versions of things that would strengthen or weaken if they actually made statements. At the end of the day, same task, right? Any questions about that? Just notice that it could go either way. Arvin, if you've seen any of these recordings, there's no point in even thinking about that. It's a non-thing. There's no benefit in thinking about it, and lots of risk of distraction. Don't think about it. All right. Any other questions? Okay, cool. Let's talk about this one. Okay, let's go ahead and pick something. Remember, at this point, you've probably crossed over that magic border from looking for things to looking at things. If you're just looking at things, that's bad news bears. Okay. So this is definitely about what people do, right? I mean, this is all about government and elderly people and etc. So definitely we can personalize. I mean, whose point of view are we ultimately considering here? In fact, the conclusion of this argument is actually about someone's point of view explicitly this time. It's not even about actions. Like this is what's happening. So whose point of view is going to be most illustrative here? Yeah, it's going to be the people who are actually experiencing this change, or should we say lack of change. Right, so basically they are no better off, which means they are financially in the same situation. So you want to know why. So you become an elderly person in this country, of Runaja or whatever, and you want to explain why this might be so, right? Like this is identical to those like explain the weird result or the discrepancy type of problems, right? You have to just fill in the reason. So, okay. Let's read this from that point of view. So they decided to increase your pension by 20%. Your pension, along with all the other elderly people, was increased by 20%. Okay, and that's one thing. That's a thing. It also says that no inflation, so it really was a 20% increase. So, you know, like in other words, the percentage increase was not erased by, if there was massive inflation, that could have erased the value of the 20%. But this means that, therefore, the value of the percent increase is real. If it didn't tell you that, then one way that you could justify what happened was just, okay, well, there was inflation of 20% or more. But they rule that out here. That's the point of the statement. And then, importantly, also, like you're not waiting to get the money. I mean, you got it. You actually received it. It's been duly received by all eligible people, including you. So, and you actually got the money. Like you're not still waiting for it. So I mean, this is pretty clearly a benefit, right? I mean, like they pretty much ruled out all of the reasons why it might be a fake benefit. Like if it didn't outpace inflation, it would be a fake benefit, but they ruled that out. And if you were still waiting for it, then it would be fake, at least until you received it. But this means you really are getting more money from the government. That's what you should take away from this entire passage. Is yes, sir or madam, you really are getting more money from the government. But then, what does this mean to a 9-year-old? You are no better off financially. What does that mean in simpler terms? Who's no better off financially? Yeah, you still, but somehow, you don't have any more money overall. The same total money overall. I can color code that the same way as it is up there. Okay, I mean, what insufficient? I don't know what you mean by insufficient. But I mean, if you look at these two things, I mean, you honestly are getting more government pension money, but you are not getting more money total. Like, what does this mathematically have to mean is happening? Like, what's the only way that these two statements could be both true? Yeah, right. Like if I spend more hours working at some job, but then I don't work any more total hours, then that must mean I have another job that I'm working less at. Because otherwise there would be nothing to cancel that out, right? So this just means there has to be, well, but if you're spending, that's not it. Because better off financially is spending money doesn't really affect that. I mean, in fact, if it's what better off financially means you have the money to spend or you don't. I mean, what you do with it is your choice, but spending would be after this, not part of it. Yeah, the point is if you combine these two statements, then you got to realize, and this is a connection you should make as you read, because in the real world you would make this connection instantly. So whether you made it here is a pretty good litmus test of whether you're reading this the way you need to. I mean, instant connection that you should make is there must be another source of money, and that source must decrease in pace with the increase in the government. So that source must be paying you less as the government pays you more. Has to be. I mean, otherwise this is a mathematical impossibility. So, that's not relevant because 20% greater is still 20% greater. I mean, even if you started with a modest amount, if you go up by 20%, you are still very clearly better off. Better off is, more dollars is always better off than fewer dollars. Yeah, if you have to set up algebra equations, that's probably not great. I mean, if you're using that as an explanation in retrospect, then sure. But hopefully you're not doing that while you're actually solving the problem. Hopefully. Yeah, I mean, that money's going down somewhere else. That SB says, right? Sure. So let's take a look. Well, Riz, R-I-Z, we're not assuming. I mean, it has to be true. Again, think about the analogy that I made. Like if I work more hours at a job during a certain period, but I don't work any more hours overall, then I have to have a second job where I work fewer hours. Because there's no way to cancel this out otherwise, right? So if you didn't have any other sources of money, then you would absolutely, in point of fact, be better off. Because if this was your only source, it went up. So I mean, if this is true, there must be another source. Okay. But even if you thought that, I mean, I could see how you might have those thoughts, but you got to think about math. I mean, if something goes up, but the total does not go up, then something else must have gone down. That's just how things work, right? So. And I mean, also, you got to keep an open mind here because other source of money doesn't have to be a job. I mean, the one sort of fault I see in your logic there is that you equate not working with having only one income source. So you're not thinking about the fact that they might be getting income that isn't from a job. So keep that in mind. Okay. Let's look at the choices. So A is exactly the opposite of what we want. In fact, A would not only not fill in the blank, but A would actually make the blank impossible. So this is the direct opposite of what we want. Like, it actually disproves the green statement. That's not good. Choice B, this says that it was kind of slow, but you know what? You got the money, and so did everybody else. So even if it was kind of slow, it happened, so this is irrelevant. This talks about what happens in times of inflation, but there's no inflation right now, so we don't care. This says the pension was increased when there were more poor older people than ever, but okay, that's great. I mean, this may be the reason why they did it. I mean, this might be the impetus behind the increase. But that's not the point. We're talking about results. This is not a result. I mean, the way you would interpret this, I mean, this illuminates the motivation, perhaps, for the increase. But we don't care. We actually don't care what precipitated the increase at all. We only care about results. So this is also irrelevant. Doesn't matter what circumstances it was increased in. The fact that it was increased is all we care about. I mean, it might have been increased out of pure caprice, even when everybody was already rich. I mean, who cares, right? We're just talking about mathematical increases or not. And then E says, aha, here's your second source of income. It's your kids. Your kids are giving you more money, but only enough to bring you up to a certain point that equals a comfortable living. So in other words, only up to a fixed total, where that fixed total is whatever represents a comfortable living. So that's how this is going to change, right? Because I mean, your kids are saying, okay, we're going to bring you up to, I don't know, $50,000 a year dollars. Then if the government used to pay you 15 and now they pay you 20, then your kids are just going to give you 30 instead of 35. And you're going to come out with the same comfortable living amount. One of the things. So, but this is the only one that even addresses the thing that it absolutely must address, which is there's got to be some alternate source of income besides government. And none of the other choices go into that. So, Figaro, you actually don't need to assume that. Every set of children might have a separate standard for this, but the point is they have a standard, and their standard is not suddenly going to change. So, I mean, this might be 100,000 for one family and 25,000 for the next family, but the point is that it's still a constant number for each family. So, it could be different between families, but unless their standards will suddenly change, which is not really realistic. Can't use to measure better. NL, I don't understand. Maybe you could add some words to that sentence to explain what you're saying. Like I can't use what. You can't use what to measure that. Not exactly following. Help me out there a bit. Any other questions about this problem? Okay, no one else is typing. Let's move on to another one. Like this one. Give this a shot. Okay, we should be getting to the point of picking something here. Remember, if you are looking at things and not for things, that needs to be the cue to stop. Okay, Kevin and Riz and Bella, gotta pick some things. Okay, let's talk about this thing. So it's an assumption problem. I mean, there's a few different things you can do there, but the most concrete way to approach assumption problems is what we occasionally refer to as the negation method. So let's just go ahead and take that approach. Let me just quickly outline what that is if you don't know. Remember that assumptions are, as a quick bit of background, assumptions, something that you should know about them. In fact, it's the definition of what an assumption is. Remember that assumptions are necessary. And in turn, necessary means what? Like how do you define what necessary means? Like don't just give me a synonym for necessary. Like go ahead and tell me in honestly different words. So if you're saying critical, that's just giving me a synonym. Don't just give me a word that means the same thing as necessary. That's not what necessary means, though. I mean, think about what does it mean for, yeah, there you go, right? Like, what does it mean for a vitamin to be necessary for humans? It means if you don't get it, you're dead. Same sort of thing here, without it. So, yeah, if it turns out to be false, then the entire argument is destroyed. So because assumptions in and of themselves are things that are not actually there in the argument. So you can't really find assumptions in the literal sense of finding them because they're not actually there. You kind of just have to pull them out of the air. But the thing, if you take advantage of this fact, then you can actually start from the choices. So, and this is what, the books, we call it the negation method, but you can just do this to the answer choices and then see whether that happens. So make the potential assumptions false. Make the answer choices, which are supposed to be potential assumptions, false. And then if the argument is destroyed when you do that, you've found an actual assumption. So let's do this because everything else is going to require us to actually just magic these out of thin air, whatever. So, okay, this is what we're going to do with these things. But the conclusion that they're going for, and that's what's going to help you figure out a point of view, is collective licensing fee. That's going to happen anyway, but without endangering its other revenues. So what are the other revenues that a magazine has? I mean, and notice that you might need multiple points of view. So advertising is a big deal. You know that magazines have a lot of ads in them, and then circulation is the other one, right? So you might need to read this from 2 points of view. It occasionally happens, right? So 2 major other revenues that you need to think about are subscribers, which presumably is what you mean by circulation, and advertising. So you just need to think from the point of view of each of these, probably not at the same time. Just consider it one by one from these 2 points of view. I mean, they're going to go after one of them because it has to be one correct answer to the problem, but you might need to think about it from both points of view. Okay. So if, like, they're basically saying that subscribers will not unsubscribe and that advertisers will not cease advertising. So you want to destroy this argument. This means when you make one of these choices false, what should happen? To make sure, I mean, the more specific your goal is, the easier this is. Like, what does it mean for that to be destroyed? What's going to happen? Yeah, they are endangered, so let's explain that to a 9-year-old. The goal is if you reverse one of the answer choices, then revenues will be endangered. Which means, yeah, exactly. So people will unsubscribe or advertisers will pull their ads. So that should be the consequence. If you reverse the answer choice, this should ensue. So there you go. Let's try that with each one in turn. So let me just take this to the next page. There's a little bit less clutter. Yeah. Okay, here's the question. And then here's the goal. And it's so big. All right, there. There's the goal. All right, if you reverse these choices, if you reverse A, then you get, there are what? If A is false, what does that mean? Yeah, it means there is stuff in the market that's better, is what it means. But, so what? If you think about the way this argument works, they found it superior to all the other cookware advertised in the magazine. So they're saying it has to be the best that's in the magazine. I mean, if you have some, solid gold cookware that's $10,000 somewhere else, then that's going to be inconsequential. It's the way the argument works is you have to have, the magazine should have the best cookware that is in its own magazine, but only relative to that. It doesn't have to be the best cookware in the entire world of planet Earth. So there you go. Okay. So not really a thing. So again, just a quick explanation here. Doesn't matter because the argument only considers the best among what's in the magazine. So if it disappoints customers, they thought it's periodic cookware. Yeah, what you got to think about here, though, because remember, you have to absolutely destroy this argument. I mean, if you're considering, you might need to invoke a little bit of common sense when it comes to this kind of thing. Like, A is saying, if you reverse this, there's some cookware somewhere out there in the world that is better. But that doesn't mean customers are going to be disappointed, right? I mean, just think about any other product that you would buy and think about how unreasonable of a standard that would be. Like if I buy a leather jacket that I'm really happy with, then, there's probably a leather jacket somewhere out there in the world that I would like better. But that doesn't mean I don't like the one I have. It's not reasonable to think that customers will be disappointed just because there's something better out there in the whole world. Be a little bit of a stretch. Certainly wouldn't destroy the argument. At most, it would make a tiny, tiny dent in it, but that's the most it could really do. Hopefully that helps. If we reverse B, well, that means that they will also license products other than cookware. Nobody picked this choice, actually, so be quick with it. Right now, we're only talking about cookware. So the fact that we're talking about stuff other than cookware here makes this choice just not matter. Doesn't make any difference. It doesn't say only. Arvind, if you, the word only there is from your fertile imagination. It just says they plan to license a line of cookware, but it's certainly not exclusive. There's no hint that there is an only. Let's see. All right, choice C. If you make this false, then you get they will, right? So people who make cookware, advertisers, manufacturers who advertise cookware, will be less likely to advertise in the magazine. Yeah, this totally kills it. In fact, this is a direct contradiction of what they said up here. So this is the winner. And then again, notice how direct it is. Like if you had any issues with something like choice A, then by the time you get down to this choice, they should all evaporate because, I mean, just look how directly you've destroyed this. I mean, you have people who advertise. They will not find it less attractive to advertise. If you reverse that, they will find it less attractive to advertise. That means reduction in advertising. Total direct contradiction, complete destruction of the argument. So, that's what's nice about these. If you do this negation method, you'll know. Like when the argument is totally ripped to shreds, you will definitely know it. Choice D says consumers who are not, like new consumers, will be attracted. So if you reverse this, you get the name won't attract any new consumers. But what is the argument about? Is the argument about new revenues? No, it isn't. The argument is only about preserving existing revenue. Not recruiting new sources of revenue. So remember, we look at what you did up here. This is why it helps to write down goals and look at them with your eyes. Because if you wrote this down up here, this thing is in this colored box. I mean, we're talking about existing subscribers and existing advertisers only. And if you write that down, then you can see right away that choice D is wrong. Because choice D is not about either of those people. It's not, or types of people. It's not about subscribers. It's not about advertisers. It isn't. It's about people who are neither of those at the moment. Not the issue. And then there's E like elephant. Kitchen is one of the most prestigious magazines. Well, even if it's not one of the most prestigious magazines. Thanks. I appreciate it. Even if this is true, I mean, that's fine. I mean, they still have a market niche. I mean, their ranking among magazines doesn't really have any bearing on this, because they still have subscribers and they have advertisers. I mean, if it's not one of the most prestigious magazines, then it's not going to be. The subscribers are not going to be people who are preoccupied with things like the utmost luxury. But, you know, it's still a magazine that exists, and they only care about their own consumer base and their own advertiser base. It doesn't really matter, right? I mean, the issue is Kitchen's consumer base and or advertiser base. Relative ranking, as it were, is irrelevant because we're not trying to prove anything versus other magazines. So, you know, this might be the simple cooking magazine where the gourmet magazines are much more prestigious, but that's fine. Market niche is a market niche. So, not a thing. I mean, yeah, because that's what an assumption is. So, yeah, when you negate statements, I mean, by definition, if something is an assumption, because remember, that's actually a definition, right? Assumptions are things that are necessary to arguments. But if you think about what does the word necessary mean, that's what it means. It means that if it is not true, then the whole thing is dead. So yeah, it will work every time because that's the definition of what an assumption means. So absolutely yes. Any other questions about stuff? Okay, well, we don't really have enough time to do another question here, so there's about 2 minutes left on the clock. So we will probably just close up shop here at this point. We do have some more of these. It may not be the next session because people have submitted some other topics, but we will do some more of this and at some near future date. But thanks for coming, and as always, thanks for attending. And the next one's going to be in 2 weeks, October 16th, I believe. You check the website just to make sure, but I think it is 2 weeks from today. It's not every Thursday. It's at most every other Thursday. And then when there are things like holidays or other miscellaneous things, then sometimes it's less often than that. So, like around Thanksgiving, there's 3 weeks off, and then around Christmas, there's like 4 weeks off, and so on, etc. All right, thanks, guys. I'm gonna go ahead and kill it at this point and stop the recording. Good night and good luck.